Okay. Now, let me ask you, if you are standing there or sitting on the shore, can you draw that in reality if it's in front of you? Yes, the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah? So you have only to focus and look at it like a picture.
And it was interesting because I asked George, I said, how did you end up in Louisiana, South Louisiana? And he says, well, I was in New York, and he says, I put resumes out, to different schools, and he says, I got an acceptance from USL. And he says, I didn't even know where Louisiana was, and I got a map out, and I looked up Lafayette, and saying, oh, it's right there on the coast.
Had some white sandy beaches.
Yeah, I went through the same disappointment.
That'd be hard to pass up, so that's why he came here.
Because having been born in the Middle East and lived for many years in Italy, the norm was beautiful architecture, everywhere.
And George said he was very humble. George didn't admit it, but he could speak several languages.
He spoke French, he spoke Italian, he spoke Arabic, spoke English.
Myself, when I was in school here, I had never really traveled. I had barely been anywhere, and I think that's true for a lot of the local students, right? They had not really left this area.
George provided something we just didn't have, and that was also an understanding of the other cultures. As I mentioned earlier about language, it was beyond language. It was an understanding of other cultures.
You did get a sense like he had gone all over the place, and like it provided him some connection with a little bit of the outside world.
After he started teaching, I realized he had another language that was universal that I had not seen to that level before. And that was the language of graphic communication.
He shared with students his sketches in Europe. And I think that when they saw the richness and then began to understand that drawing is not this kind of cold thing, it's actually a passionate thing.
George could draw, it's an understatement.
Yeah.
I was watching him one time, not far from San Savino, and he pulled out a stick and a piece of chocolate, and it was hot, and that chocolate was melted, and he had a card there, and he took that chocolate and that stick, and he started doing a drawing. I was like, oh my goodness.
I saw him do the same thing with coffee. It was like anything.
And I think that's kind of probably the one trigger that he started in everyone. That a drawing is something you feel, and then you transfer that feeling into the paper,
That he broke it down to the extent that students could start anywhere and reach a higher level. He just made it so easy to do that. So that was a talent that few people have and few teachers have, actually.
I think he also took the sacredness out of it, although I'm sure he, and I know that for a fact, that he valued his drawings, right? That they were precious to him. They were very personal, but when he was starting the drawings, he didn't see it that way.
Yeah.
Right? He didn't think of it as some precious object. Hence the experimentation, spilling coffee and trying things with different media didn't, he had no fear of doing any of that because at the beginning it's just not a precious thing.
We had a whole class on just drawing lines, like straight lines in a row, and I was like, what the hell am I doing? But after a while I understood. At first I was like totally like, why are we doing this? I don't get it. But when you saw him draw a line, it took on a whole different sort of meaning to it.
The university itself was interested in extending education beyond this area. Well, George was a natural, so he brought up Italy, and it came up, and we were all thrilled about it. And I was skeptical. I didn't know, how do you do this? How do you bring students to Europe? How do you do all that? Other schools have done this for a while, but we had not, and it was difficult. George made it easy. He knew what to do in Italy. He knew where to go. He could speak whatever language they were speaking.
And that's where he had gone to school. He had got a doctorate in Florence, so he helped set up that program.
It was incredible because I had a chance to teach with him. And George was on every weekend. He took those students, not only did we have class every week, right? But every weekend he would take them to a new city. he would take them to Verona, or he would take them to Cinque Terre. And of course, we had a Rome trip, but every weekend he made sure that those students had something to do.
I think it was one of the last years George actually went to Italy as well. But I was lucky enough that he went with us, and we had Tom Salmons there as well. And we had a good group. We had about 10 students or more. But my favorite story of George is we were in Santo Spirito, the church. And we were, we go to so many churches and we sketch. We were in there quietly sketching, and then all of a sudden George comes up to us all flustered. He's like, we have to leave. And we were, all looking around like, what? So he proceeds to tell us that the priest there was upset that we were sketching. And George's argument was that, no, we're praying. We're being spiritual in our drawings and our sketches. But the priest didn't buy it.
George, when he was in school, he worked in the market. And when I was there once, he met the guy that he worked for. And he turned to me and said, George is a good boy.
And he spoke Arabic. Most of those guys selling leather, on the street were Arabic, and George would go and he would, they wanted this much for the bag, and George would get it down, and he'd tell them, okay, now you can buy.
Yeah. So he would do that for the students. Get all these deals at the market and go wheel and deal. And the other thing is, being with them in Florence, we'd get off a train or we'd be in a restaurant, and all of a sudden I'd hear this, Georgie! And some lady would come over and come in and sort of hug him, and I'd ask him, well, who is that? She goes, well, I was in school with that lady, or I was in school with that guy. And so it's incredible how many people he would run into that actually knew him.
We didn't get to talk much about Italy when I was in school. We've since visited, and I would love to have been able to, tour the area with him. That would have been an amazing experience. We had a great time, but I'm sure I can see, after having visited his, I would call it joie de vivre. They call it something else, obviously, but it's you get that from him, So, or you did,
He was incredible. It was fun to be with. George had a good sense of humor, and I think that's what I liked about George the most.
Yeah, and enjoyed life. He was there. It was just going to the market or going out to eat at dinner.
He was jovial. He really made everybody feel welcome. Again, I wasn't his student, but my sense is that there was a sense of I don't know, just joy, Did you feel that?
Oh, absolutely. Like it was not uncommon. I was probably I assume I'm one of the few people you're interviewing that was both his student and a professor with him. I taught with him as well as was his student.
I didn't know that.
I taught second year with him.
That's awesome.
But always, right, like in class, and I remember this from when he was my professor as well. This didn't change over whatever it was, 25, 30 years, where he would take somebody's model or paper mock-up or whatever and put it on his head like a hat, or started wearing it, figuring out how it could be fashion, right? But there was always a message in there that just was never spoken, just to really make you think outside the box, right? Like your assumptions about something you shouldn't pretend like you know everything about your project, right? That project you're working on, you should be able to look at it in some way that you've never seen it before. That's something I took to heart. I mean, it's maybe one of the most important things that I learned from him, and that I do it every time I meet with someone new where we're working on a project. One of the first things we talk about, or I bring up, is that there is no idea that is out of bounds, right? I don't care how outlandish it is. I don't care how far-fetched it is. Everything is on the table, right? And to me, that comes from George. That's definitely